right now, as you're watching this, the most dangerous drug lord who ever lived is sitting in a 7 by 12-foot concrete box in the middle of nowhere, Colorado, and he is losing his mind trying to get out. We're talking about Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, a man who already escaped from 2 maximum security prisons in Mexico, a man who had a mile-long tunnel built under his own shower, a man who once bribed his way out of prison dressed in a guard's uniform and walked right through the front door. This dude escaped from prison twice, and now he's writing handwritten letters to federal judges begging to be sent back to Mexico, sending letter after letter after letter, 5 letters in just the last few months alone. But here's the thing, it ain't working, because this time El Chapo ran into something he's never faced before, a prison that has never, not once, not in over 30 years, had a single successful escape. Today we're breaking down everything, who this man really is, how he pulled off 2 of the most legendary prison breaks in history, how the feds finally caught him for good, what his life looks like inside the most terrifying prison on American soil, and why every single attempt he's made to get out of there has been shut down cold. Stay with me, because this story goes deeper than you think. To understand why the United States government went to such extreme lengths to lock this man down, and why they will never let him go, you gotta understand who Joaquin Guzman Loera actually was before the prison walls closed in on him. This wasn't just a drug dealer. This was the CEO of the most powerful drug trafficking organization in the history of the Western Hemisphere. At his peak, El Chapo ran the Sinaloa cartel, an operation so massive, so sophisticated, so embedded in every level of government, from local Mexican cops all the way up to military generals and sitting presidents, that it was basically a state within a state. Forbes magazine put this man on their billionaires list. His cartel was responsible for flooding the United States with 200 tons of cocaine. Let that number sink in. 200 tons. Stuffed inside jalapeno cans, hidden in the undercarriages of cars, shot through underground tunnels that rivaled construction projects. He was worth an estimated $14 billion. Billion, with a B. And when you have that kind of money and that kind of power, escaping from prison isn't that hard, when the prison is in Mexico and half the guards are on your payroll. But this time, El Chapo isn't in Mexico, he's in Colorado, at a place called ADX Florence. And everything he ever used to get free, money, bribery, tunnels, contacts, loyalty, none of it means anything in there. Let me take you back to the beginning so you can really understand how a man like this ends up in a place from which there is genuinely no escape. Let's rewind all the way back to April 4th, 1957. A tiny village called La Tuna in the mountains of Sinaloa, Mexico, one of the poorest, most remote regions in the country. No paved roads, no running water, no way out, unless you made one yourself. This is where Joaquin Archivaldo Guzman Loera was born, the eldest of 7 children in a family that had nothing. His father was an opium poppy farmer, and yes, that's exactly what it sounds like. From the jump, this kid grew up surrounded by the drug trade. It wasn't a choice, it was survival. They called him El Chapo, a nickname that means shorty in Spanish, because at 5 feet 6 inches he was one of the smaller kids around. But don't let that fool you, because from a very young age, El Chapo had something that most people never develop: a ruthless, calculating, ice-cold mind for business. Even as a teenager, he could see angles other people missed. In his late teens, he left Sinaloa and linked up with the Guadalajara cartel, working under a man named Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, the godfather of the modern Mexican drug trade. El Chapo was a fast learner. He rose through the ranks quickly, earning a reputation for efficiency, for logistics, for finding routes and moving product in ways nobody had thought of before. By the early 1990s, when the Guadalajara cartel fractured and split, El Chapo emerged as one of the key leaders of what would become the Sinaloa cartel. And over the next 2 decades, he turned it into the most powerful drug trafficking organization in the world. Now, this is important. In 1993, El Chapo was first arrested in Guatemala after Mexican and Guatemalan authorities tracked him down following the accidental assassination of a Catholic cardinal. He was extradited to Mexico and sentenced to 20 years in prison. He landed at a maximum security facility called La Palma, then was transferred in 1995 to an even higher security prison called Puente Grande in Jalisco. Here's where it gets crazy. Even behind bars, El Chapo never stopped running his cartel. According to multiple sources and court testimony, Guzman had most of the people working inside Puente Grande on his payroll. Prison guards, administrators. He ordered meals off a custom menu. He had cell phone access. He received visits from women. He conducted business from inside a maximum security prison like it was his personal office. But there was one thing that started to terrify him: the possibility that he'd be extradited to the United States. In Mexico, he owned the system. In America, he owned nothing. That fear is what triggered the first great escape, January 19, 2001. It's late at night at Puente Grande Maximum Security Prison, Jalisco, Mexico. According to official Mexican government accounts, a prison guard named Francisco Javier Camberos Rivera, known by his nickname El Chito, the Silent One, walked over to El Chapo's cell and opened the door. Guards walked El Chapo down the corridors of the prison. Security cameras along the route had been disabled. Electronic doors that should have required multiple authorizations swung open without a sound. El Chapo climbed into a cart full of dirty laundry. El Chito wheeled him through the prison, past checkpoints, through the inner parking lot where only one guard was posted, and that guard looked away. El Chapo jumped out of the cart and leaped into the trunk of a waiting Chevrolet Monte Carlo, and just like that, he was gone. Now, here's where it gets real. Some investigators and journalists have pushed back on the laundry cart story. According to journalist Annabel Hernandez, who spent years examining Guzman's case files, the prison had heat sensors at security checkpoints. A human body hidden in a laundry cart would have triggered them. The more likely story, she argues, is that El Chapo walked out of that prison through the front entrance, dressed as a federal police officer with the full cooperation of the warden and senior prison staff. Either way, the result was the same. The world's most wanted drug lord had just vanished from one of Mexico's supposedly highest security prisons. And instead of being embarrassed into silence, El Chapo's escape elevated his reputation to near mythical status. In Sinaloa, they wrote songs about it. People in the mountains celebrated. He was a folk hero. The Mexican government launched a massive manhunt, hundreds of police and soldiers, checkpoints across every major highway. But El Chapo was already ghost. He spent the better part of a year moving between safe houses, Guadalajara, Cuernavaca, Puebla, Mexico City, each time slipping the net. Then he did something remarkable. He went back to work. Within months of escaping, he had re-established himself within the Sinaloa cartel hierarchy, proving to his rivals and his allies alike that his time in prison hadn't cost him an ounce of power. If anything, he was more dangerous. For the next 13 years, El Chapo remained a fugitive. 13 years, building the cartel into a global empire, moving cocaine through tunnels under the U.S. border, corrupting officials at every level of the Mexican government, growing richer by the billions, until February 2014. Mexican Marines finally tracked Guzman down to a high-rise condominium in the resort city of Mazatlan, Sinaloa. After a series of raids on properties connected to him, they burst through the front door. El Chapo was caught in his own bedroom with his wife, Emma Coronel. No dramatic tunnel escape this time. He was taken into custody and transferred to the Altiplano Maximum Security Federal Prison outside Mexico City. The world exhaled. The most wanted man in the Western Hemisphere was behind bars. Again. Except nobody told El Chapo that it was over. Almost immediately after arriving at Altiplano, El Chapo started plotting. According to testimony from his own former lieutenant, Damaso Lopez Nunez, who would later flip and testify against him in the United States, Guzman wasted no time. The plan? Build a tunnel. Not a scrappy, cobbled-together escape route. A fully engineered, ventilated, lighted, mile-long underground corridor, running from a half-constructed house in a cornfield outside the prison perimeter, deep underground and coming up directly under the shower drain inside El Chapo's prison cell. Think about that engineering. From inside the prison, cartel workers on the outside were digging in the dark, calculating angles, installing ventilation pipes, running electrical wire for lighting. And inside the prison, El Chapo could hear them. According to his lieutenant's testimony, the rumbling beneath his cell was so loud that other inmates were starting to complain. El Chapo was impatient, but the work took time. The tunnel had to be built just barely tall enough for a man of El Chapo's height, about 5 feet 6 inches, so he could move through it without hitting his head. They installed a modified motorcycle on rails to transport tools and materials in and out during construction. This wasn't a prison break. This was a military operation. The cartel reportedly paid a $2 million bribe to the chief of Mexico's prison system to facilitate the escape. El Chapo's wife, Emma Coronel, was allegedly a key coordinator of the entire operation, working with his sons on the outside while Guzman directed from his cell. July 11, 2015, 8:52 p.m. Prison surveillance cameras watched El Chapo walk toward the shower area of his cell, the only blind spot in the entire room where cameras couldn't see. He bent down. He disappeared. Guards gave him roughly 30 minutes. The shower was his private space before they got suspicious. When they finally entered his cell, he was gone. A small opening in the floor of the shower, a ladder leading down into darkness. By the time the alarm was raised, El Chapo was already a mile away, emerging through the floor of that half-built house in the cornfields where a vehicle was waiting. The embarrassment for the Mexican government was catastrophic. President Enrique Peña Nieto, who was in France at the time, publicly called the escape an affront to the Mexican state. 7 prison employees were immediately arrested and charged. The international community was stunned. For 6 months, El Chapo was on the run again. And again, his legend grew. Stories circulated, rumors flew. Then on January 8, 2016, Mexican Marines tracked him to a safe house in Los Mochis, Sinaloa. There was a shootout, one of the most intense raids in Mexican history. Cartel bodyguards opened fire. Marines returned fire. When it was over, El Chapo was captured, alive, crawling out of a sewer tunnel beneath the city streets. No more tunnels, no more laundry carts, no more million-dollar bribes. This time, the Americans had a deal in place, and they weren't going to wait. January 19, 2017, exactly 16 years to the day after his first escape from Puente Grande, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman was put on a plane and extradited to the United States of America. He landed in New York. He was immediately transferred to solitary confinement at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan, a heavily fortified facility with no windows, 24-hour surveillance, and essentially no human contact. The U.S. wasn't playing games this time. El Chapo was placed under what's called special administrative measures. He couldn't communicate with anyone except his lawyers and occasionally a couple of immediate family members. Every call monitored, every letter read, every conversation recorded. He sat in that Manhattan cell for almost 2 years, waiting for trial. November 13, 2018, United States District Court for the Eastern District of New York, Brooklyn. The trial of the century begins. The prosecution came in with an avalanche. And that's not just a figure of speech. That's literally what El Chapo's own defense attorney Jeffrey Lichtman called it afterwards. An avalanche. Over 50 witnesses, 200 hours of testimony, intercepted phone calls, text messages, financial records, photographs, drug seizures totaling over 130,000 kilograms of cocaine and heroin, weapons including AK-47s and a rocket-propelled grenade launcher, ledgers, videos, and then there were the cooperating witnesses, former cartel insiders who knew everything and who were willing to get on that stand and lay it all out. Let me break down some of what came out in that courtroom because this is where it gets wild. One insider described Mexican workers at a Sinaloa packaging facility getting contact highs from being surrounded by so much cocaine while they stuffed it into thousands of jalapeno pepper cans. 25 to 30 tons of cocaine per year shipped inside cans of jalapenos into the United States, worth $500 million annually just from the jalapeno cans. Another witness testified about El Chapo acting as his own hitman, personally ordering the kidnapping of a rival who had disrespected him, having the man beaten and shot, and then ordering his men to bury the victim alive, still breathing, gasping for air, buried. His personal armory was described in court: a gold-plated AK-47, 3 diamond-encrusted pistols, one with his personal initials JGL embedded in the grip. This man walked around with monogrammed, jewel-studded weapons. The IT angle was something else entirely. The feds had gotten to El Chapo's own technology guy, Christian Rodriguez, a Colombian computer specialist who had built a custom encrypted communication system for the cartel. Rodriguez flipped. He gave federal agents complete access to El Chapo's private messages and phone calls, conversations with cartel associates, with his mistresses, with his wife. The feds had been reading his texts and listening to his calls for years. Then came the political bombshells. Colombian trafficker Alex Cifuentes took the stand and testified that El Chapo had paid a $100 million bribe to former Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto. $100 million in exchange for protection and the ability to operate freely. Peña Nieto denied it, but the allegation landed like a nuclear bomb in the courtroom. And then there was the Chicago connection. The Flores twins, Pedro and Margarito Flores, Chicago-based drug distributors who testified that they and their brother imported 38 tons of cocaine from El Chapo's cartel, sending back $800 million in cash to Sinaloa. $800 million in cash from Chicago. One of the twins even wore a wire for the feds and recorded actual conversations with Guzman himself. The defense tried everything. Jeffrey Lichtman argued that El Chapo was a scapegoat, that the real power behind the Sinaloa cartel was his co-founder Ismael El Mayo Zambada, who was still free, and that the government was targeting the wrong man. He called the cooperating witnesses lifelong liars who would say anything to reduce their own prison sentences. The defense called one witness. The prosecution called 56. After 11 weeks of prosecution testimony and 6 days of jury deliberation, on February 12, 2019, the verdict came in. Guilty on all counts, every single one. The courtroom was silent. El Chapo's wife gave him a subtle thumbs up from the gallery. He showed no visible emotion. U.S. Attorney Richard Donahue stepped up to the microphone outside the courthouse and said something that would echo through the years. He said, "It is a sentence from which there is no escape and no return." That July, Judge Brian Cogan sentenced Joaquin Guzman Loera to life in prison plus 30 additional years. He was also ordered to forfeit $12.6 billion. Then they put him in a car, drove him to a plane, and flew him to Colorado. Now here's what's important to understand. ADX Florence is not a regular maximum security prison. It's not even a regular supermax prison. It is in a category by itself. Located about 100 miles south of Denver in the middle of nowhere, Colorado, ADX Florence opened in 1994 and was specifically designed for one purpose: to house human beings who are considered too dangerous, too high profile, or too great a security risk for any other prison in the United States. It has held the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski, the Boston Marathon bomber, Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, the 1993 World Trade Center bomber Ramzi Yousef, Oklahoma City bombing conspirator Terry Nichols, September 11th planner Zacarias Moussaoui, and now El Chapo. In over 30 years of operation, not one single prisoner has ever escaped. Not one. Zero. A former inmate who spent 15 years inside described it like this: "You're made to languish. You're literally buried alive. It's the death penalty on a payment plan." That's the place El Chapo now calls home, forever. El Chapo is housed in a special 4-cell wing of ADX Florence known as the Suites. Don't let the name fool you. There's nothing sweet about it. The wing has only 4 cells total. El Chapo's cell measures 12 feet by 7 feet. Inside, a bed, a desk, a bathroom, and a shower. All constructed almost entirely from poured concrete. The furniture is literally built into the walls so it cannot be moved. The shower runs on a timer to prevent flooding. The toilet shuts off automatically if something is stuffed into it. There is one window. It is 4 inches wide. 4 inches, not 4 feet, 4 inches. That is his entire view of the outside world. He spends 23 hours a day in that cell. The 1 hour of recreation time he gets is not what you'd picture. It's not a yard with other inmates. It's a separate, fortified recreation cage attached directly to his cell. He goes out alone. He exercises alone. He comes back in alone. El Chapo is not allowed to communicate with any other prisoners. He cannot speak to anyone outside the prison except his attorneys and 1 or 2 immediate family members. And those communications are strictly monitored, every word, recorded by both the Bureau of Prisons and the FBI. Here's an interesting detail that came out in a legal filing. The only other inmate in El Chapo's wing is a man named James Sabatino, a Miami-based mob con artist who speaks some Spanish. For years, Sabatino served as an unofficial translator between El Chapo and the guards because there aren't many Spanish-speaking staff at ADX Florence. El Chapo apparently learned a little English from Sabatino by shouting through their cell doors. That is the extent of El Chapo's social life, shouting through doors to a con artist from Miami. His cell has a night vision camera with audio recording. He is watched 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, even when he sleeps. In letters he's managed to get out through his legal team, El Chapo has described conditions that sound genuinely brutal. He wrote that prison staff wake him up 4 or 5 times per night with sudden blasts of extreme heat that last 15 minutes each, claiming his heart races, his blood pressure spikes, and and he cannot sleep properly. He says he has experienced memory loss, severe anxiety, and depression. His lawyers have reported strange and worrying changes in his mental state, noting that years of solitary confinement appear to be having a profound psychological effect on him. This is the man who once ran a $14 billion cartel from inside a Mexican prison. Now he can barely get a message out to his attorneys without it being read by federal agents. And this is where his escape attempts are happening now. Not through tunnels, not through bribed guards, through pen and paper. For years now, El Chapo has been waging a legal war from inside that concrete box, and it has been going nowhere fast. It started almost immediately after his conviction was upheld on appeal. In January 2022, the Second Circuit Court of Appeals in New York confirmed Guzman's sentence. That door officially closed. Every argument his legal team had made about jury misconduct, about cooperating witnesses lying, about procedural violations, all of it denied. So El Chapo changed strategy. He started writing letters directly to the courts, handwritten letters in Spanish and increasingly in broken English, addressed to Judge Brian Cogan, the federal judge in Brooklyn who sentenced him. Over the past few years, he has sent multiple letters making multiple different requests. Let me walk you through what he's actually been asking for, because it tells the whole story. Request 1. Immediate release. El Chapo has, on multiple occasions, requested that his sentence simply be vacated, set aside, canceled, that he be let out. His argument, that the charges against him were never actually proven, that the evidence presented at trial was fabricated, that he is innocent. Judge Cogan's response? Denied. Every time. Request 2. A new trial. El Chapo has repeatedly argued that he did not receive a fair trial, pointing to reports that anonymous jurors had read news articles about him during the proceedings, violating rules about outside information. A juror did acknowledge after the verdict that they had checked social media for trial updates, but the courts ruled this did not constitute grounds for a new trial given the overwhelming evidence against him. Denied. Request 3. Access to jury deliberation documents. El Chapo asked the court to hand over internal jury notes, the communications jurors wrote to each other and to the judge during deliberations. His argument was that these notes would reveal bias or improper conduct. Denied. Request 4. Mental health treatment. El Chapo has written about the psychological impact of his isolation, requesting access to group therapy, regular visits from a mental health professional, and changes to his conditions of confinement. The Bureau of Prisons has refused to loosen any restrictions. Request 5, and this is the most recent one, the one that just made headlines in May of 2026. In April 2026, El Chapo handed a handwritten letter to his legal team. It was dated April 23rd. On May 1st, it was officially filed in the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of New York. The letter went public on May 4th, 2026. And for real, this letter is something else. It's written in grammatically incorrect English, which is significant on its own. El Chapo has apparently been trying to learn English inside ADX Florence, possibly through those conversations shouted through cell doors with his only neighbor. In the letter he wrote, and I'm quoting him directly here, "This is a polite letter about the hardcore evidence that wasn't proven for my case." He is asking, again, for what he calls equal treatment of the law, and specifically requesting an extradition release back to Mexico. He claims he has been waiting for his appeal to be properly addressed for 3 years. He invokes the protection of the First through Fifth Amendments of the U.S. Constitution. He wants to go home, and now here's why that will never happen. First, El Chapo escaped from 2 maximum security Mexican prisons twice, with the full cooperation of corrupt guards, administrators, and government officials. The U.S. government has zero confidence that Mexico can hold him. The former warden of ADX Florence put it plainly when El Chapo first arrived. When you look at El Chapo's escape history, his violence, his access to funds and people, within the system it's not even questioned where he needs to be held. Second, the whole reason El Chapo was extradited to the United States in the first place was because he was trying to avoid American justice. His cartel reportedly attempted one more escape plot even after his 2016 recapture, passing a $2 million bribe to a Mexican prison official. The moment he's back on Mexican soil, the same networks that got him out twice will try to get him out a third time. Third, the U.S. government has explicitly maintained that El Chapo's incarceration at ADX Florence is necessary to prevent him from communicating with his criminal network. Even from inside a Mexican prison, this man was able to run a $1 billion drug empire. The restrictions at ADX Florence are the only thing that has truly cut him off. So what happened to the letter? Judge Brian Cogan reviewed it and dismissed it entirely. In a written opinion, the judge stated that El Chapo's requests make no sense and that none of them possess any legal merit. He noted that this was part of a persistent pattern. El Chapo had now written 5 separate letters to him in a short period, each asking for a different form of relief, and each one had been denied. The legal door slammed shut again. Here's the part of this story that's almost poetic in a dark way. For his entire adult life, El Chapo's greatest weapon wasn't violence. It wasn't money. It was the ability to corrupt systems, to find the weak point in any structure, whether that was a prison guard, a government official, a judge, a general, and exploit it. He was one of the most sophisticated operators in the history of organized crime precisely because he understood that every system has a crack and every person has a price. In Mexico, that worked, because the systems were corruptible, because guards made pennies and El Chapo could offer them 10 times their salary, because prison administrators were vulnerable, because the entire infrastructure was porous. ADX Florence was designed from the ground up to defeat exactly this kind of person. The officers are carefully vetted. Rotation protocols prevent relationships from forming between staff and inmates. Every interaction is recorded. The facility is 100 miles from Denver. No cartel network can get close to it without being noticed. The 1,400 remote-controlled steel doors mean that even if someone managed to bribe a single guard, they'd need access to dozens of systems simultaneously to create an opening. And El Chapo can hear the rumbling of no tunnel being dug beneath his cell this time. There's no wife on the outside coordinating his sons. His sons, Los Chapitos, were themselves arrested and are fighting their own legal battles. The cartel is fractured, at war with itself. El Mayo Zambada, his old partner, was captured and pleaded guilty to drug trafficking charges. The entire empire has crumbled. And El Chapo is sitting in a 7 by 12-foot concrete room, writing letters in broken English to a judge who describes them as senseless. This is some wild stuff, but it's also the reality of what happens when the most escape-proof institution in America finally gets the man who spent a lifetime making prisons look foolish. His health is reportedly deteriorating. His mental state is reportedly fragile. His lawyers say he's changing in strange and worrying ways. And the U.S. government's position remains completely unchanged. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman will spend every remaining day of his life inside ADX Florence. There is no deal. There is no transfer. There is no new trial. Whether you see El Chapo as a villain, a folk hero, or something more complicated, his story is genuinely one of the most extraordinary criminal sagas in modern history. 2 escapes, a billion-dollar empire, a trial that shook governments, and now, forever, a 7 by 12-foot concrete room in the mountains of Colorado. The most escape-proof prison in America finally has its most famous resident, and no matter how many letters he writes, no matter how many times his lawyers file motions, appeal rulings, or plead his case to deaf ears, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman is not getting out. The Alcatraz of the Rockies finally found its El Chapo, and El Chapo, he finally found a wall he can't get through. If you made it to the end of this video, for real, thank you. Drop a comment below. What do you think? Is ADX Florence the right place for him? Or is there something else going on here that the government doesn't want us to look at too closely? Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.